So I teach preschool part-time, and I have seen how relevant the conversation of consent can be, even in the context of preschool kids, as you can see on my slide. Children of that age can have interactions where there is forced physical contact. That's why when I teach the kids I look after, I teach them a simplified version of consent. I teach them to keep their hands and feet to themselves, unless a friend asks for a hug or to hold hands. Consent is defined by Merriam-Webster as agreeing to do something or giving permission for something to happen or be done. I would like to delve into what is consent simplified and why it is an important concept that should be taught in schools and added to the curriculum to prepare young adults to enter society. Consent, when involving either sexual or physical contact, requires an individual to verbally ask permission of another individual before any kind of physical contact. Consent can only be given in a sexual context by legal adults and by those with a clear state of mind. Now, this concept, it is not new in some forms, such as teaching kids about personal space, but it is largely not taught in formal education, resulting in uninformed young adults entering society without a comprehensive understanding of consent. The current form of consent you may have seen or been taught at school, described from my personal experience, is the discussion on personal space, teaching children that physical contact is either completely inappropriate or only allowed with consent and by certain individuals like parents and doctors. Even in my own personal experience, in elementary, junior high, high school, there was no mention of the concept consent. In high school, I finally learned about the concept, but through the internet. And during sex education, I asked my teachers about the concept, but I was dismissed and ignored without any elaboration of the concept to my classmates. Now, the recent outbreak of the coronavirus has made this issue more relevant to more people. More people are uncomfortable with unprompted physical contact. After 2 years of social distancing and avoiding close contact, it is likely it'll become more normal to ask permission and consent before physically engaging with others. A survey on sexual assault victims by the Japanese government in 2019 found that 63% of respondents have experienced being groped or assaulted over clothing on the train, regardless of gender. Now, this is the first time I'll be saying this publicly, but I had a personal experience being publicly assaulted on the train. A stranger had forced themselves onto me. It was incredibly traumatic and terrifying, and the most violated I've ever felt in my entire life. I share this concept with you here today because I know so many of you understand what it's like to be on the receiving end of these aggressive harassers. This story, it's not unique, not at all. Similar stories can be found in Japan and internationally. Part of the reason why I moved away from Japan, even though I'm half Japanese, was because my father had witnessed and stepped into so many situations where young women were being publicly harassed and assaulted on the train. We need to stop the culture of blaming women or instructing women to dress appropriately and to prepare their reactions for these interactions. We cannot stand by and watch another generation of young adults add to this cycle of trauma. Teaching young adults about consent not only empowers them for the potential sexual relationships they are likely entering, but also teaches them on how they should behave in society. As you can see on my slide, the pie chart shows the number of women in orange and the number of men in blue that have been publicly harassed. A research by We2 Japan in 2019 found that out of 12,000 respondents, 30% of men have experienced public harassment, while 70% of women have experienced some form of public harassment. These statistics show how prevalent this issue is, how many people have been traumatized and gone through harassment. This proves how the current method is not working. We need to teach consent to prevent any more children from experiencing public physical assault. Now, this concept may seem difficult and hard to explain or teach, but there are simple examples or simple scenarios that can be used to teach this very important lesson. Now, proving how consent is not only not new, but also not too complicated to teach, Blue Seat Studios has a popular video uploaded in 2015 explaining consent by using an example about tea. Consent, it's simple as tea. The tea example has proceeded to become commonly used, especially in the UK. The tea example uses a scenario where you're offering tea to someone to simply explain some aspects of consent. Much like consent, you don't serve tea to someone who doesn't want tea. It does not make them magically want it if they had declined. Therefore, if someone had declined an offer for physical contact, you cannot claim they had wanted it all along. The tea example also goes into the impermanence of consent. If you offer tea to someone and they accept, it does not mean they automatically want tea each time they see you. Consent is not permanent. You must ask each time before a physical interaction. Now, these simple scenarios and simple examples could be utilized and used in sex education curriculum to introduce this very important lesson without the extra complexity of different physical interactions. Now, my brother was taught consent at 16. He is 20 now and a respectable adult that would never engage in forced physical contact with a non-consenting victim. I say this confidently because I taught him consent. I understand fully that teaching consent will not solve all issues surrounding physical assaults. I know criminals will continue to exist, but I also know this is a crucial step that is needed to be taken by the education system. Knowledge is power. We cannot stand by and watch another generation enter society ill-equipped, creating more victims and perpetrators of physical assaults. There are people who are critics and against introducing consent at an early age. They believe consent is too adult or too closely associated with sexual relationships. And though I understand and I agree, introducing the word consent and the complexities of consent likely will not be effective or appropriate for a young audience. To those critics, I ask, what other methods are there than introducing simplified consent and personal space to address the pressing issue that is physical assaults. Consent is a complex concept, yet to be fully recognized by most educational institutions. However, there are ways to slowly integrate this important concept and lesson to young people by using opportunities like the sex ed curriculum. Consent empowers people to feel safe in interactions in both relationships and in passing. This is an important tool that should be introduced to young people as soon as possible. Instead of arming or punishing women to protect them from unwanted physical interactions, we need to teach our young adults to respect people's boundaries and to ask consent before physically engaging in them. And if you, listening, if you are an adult, finished with all your education, I still want you to apply this to your life. We need to have respect towards others' boundaries, to create a future where our children are not afraid to be assaulted. Finally, teaching consent could make a difference. Even a small percentage of people not going through the trauma that is physical assaults. There is a necessity in people learning consent. We cannot continue with the methods that are failing the people. It's failed me, and it's failed countless other women and men. Next time you see your sister, your brother, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or just your friends, start a conversation on consent. And maybe, just maybe in the future, consent can be taught in schools. But we cannot wait and watch as more people are failed to be protected. Start the conversation. Learn about consent. Thank you.